All right, so you send us this Serie A match, Napoli and Juventus, January 25th, 2025. Looks like a thriller.
Yeah, it it was a good one. Definitely lived up to the hype.
Well, let's dive into it then. So we've got your analysis right here.
Great.
And a lot to unpack. Tactical battles, a debut goal,
Yeah.
some penalty drama. So let's just get right into it.
Sounds good.
So starting with those pre-match expectations, everyone was talking about Conte's 4-3-3 for Napoli and Motta's 3-4-3 for Juventus.
Right.
And these are classic formations, right? But I feel like both these managers, they always
They got
some tricks up their sleeves. So what were they really going for here?
Well, I think with Conte's 4-3-3 at Napoli, it was all about control. Dictating the tempo, building up patiently from the back, and then waiting for the right moment to strike. They wanted to be solid defensively, but they also wanted to have that flexibility to quickly transition into attack.
Okay, so using
those wide players to stretch Juventus, create space for Lukaku.
So Juventus with their 3-4-3, were they just kind of sitting back and absorbing that pressure?
Not really. I think, yes, the 3-4-3 is very much about defensive solidity.
Right.
But it's also about lightning fast transitions and, those classic counterattacks that Juventus are known for. They knew Napoli would be pushing forward and they wanted to hit them, hard and fast on the break when the defense was stretched thin.
Right.
Having Colomani up front with his pace and directness, that made that counterattacking threat even more potent.
Well, speaking of Colomani, we got to talk about that debut goal.
Yeah.
Sixth touch of the game, and he puts it in the back of the net.
It was a beauty.
What a way to announce your,
What a way to introduce yourself to SerieA, right?
Yeah.
It was a clinical finish, absolutely. But what I found interesting about that goal was how it exposed, I think, a potential weakness in Napoli's setup.
Oh.
That high line, which is usually a strength for them, it left them vulnerable to those quick counterattacks. So it was a clever tactical move by Motta to exploit that space behind their defense.
And you have to wonder, did that early goal kind of play a role in those missed chances that we saw from Napoli in the first half? It felt like they were almost pushing too hard, trying to force things a little bit.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Juventus's early goal definitely put them on the back foot a little bit, and you could sense a bit of frustration creeping into their play. But you can also see that they were starting to control possession, starting to create those opportunities. They were building some momentum. It felt like it was only a matter of time before they kind of broke through that Juventus defense.
Breakthrough, they did. Anguissa, that fantastic header, 54th minute, brings Napoli level.
What a goal.
That felt like a real turning point.
It was a turning point. Not only did it bring them level, but it just completely shifted the momentum. From that moment on, Juventus seemed to lose their grip on the game, and Napoli just grew in confidence with every passing minute. You could just really feel the tide turning.
And that's where I think Conte's tactical flexibility just really came into play. That decision to push his fullbacks, Di Lorenzo and Spinazzola, higher up the pitch.
That was huge.
In the second half.
It was huge. It was a bold move, no doubt about it, but it completely changed the dynamic.
Yeah.
Pushing those fullbacks higher created overloads on the flanks. It stretched that Juventus defense even thinner, created space for those Napoli attackers to exploit. It was a classic example of those in-game adjustments making all the difference.
It was, and ultimately it led to that decisive penalty. Just chaos in the Juventus box, and Lukaku steps up, slots it home. Game over.
That penalty was just a direct result of the pressure Napoli were putting on that Juventus defense.
Yeah.
They were forced into making mistakes, and Lukaku, as he so often does, made them pay. It was just a clinical finish to a dominant second-half performance from Napoli.
So we've talked about formations, we've talked about goals, we've talked about those tactical adjustments. But what about just the individual performances? Who really stood out for you in this match?
Well, for Napoli, it's hard to look past Lukaku. He was a constant threat up front, holding up the ball, bringing teammates into play, and, of course, scoring that winning goal. He really showed why he's considered one of the best strikers in the world.
Yeah.
But I also thought Anguissa was outstanding. He was everywhere, breaking up attacks, driving forward with the ball, scoring that crucial goal. He was the engine that drove Napoli's comeback.
Yeah. What about Juventus? Obviously that debut goal from Colomani, that's going to grab the headlines.
So for sure.
But was there anything else that stood out to you?
His goal was fantastic. It's clear he has the potential to be a real star for Juventus. But what impressed me, I think, was his overall movement, his awareness. Even though it was his first match for the club, he looked comfortable, he looked confident, he wasn't afraid to make those runs in behind the defense. His link-up play with his teammates was encouraging. I'm really excited to see how he develops over the course of the season.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Pre-match expectations, those key moments that really shaped the outcome of the match. But this wasn't just a 90-minute game.
Yeah,
it had
implications.
It had bigger implications.
Yeah, that extended far beyond the final whistle. So that's exactly what we're going to delve into next.
Let's do it. I mean, this match was a real statement from Napoli.
It was. But what does this win actually mean for Napoli going forward? I mean, they're top of the table now, but can they really sustain this and challenge for the title?
It's a huge, huge confidence booster.
Yeah.
Beating Juventus, especially like that, I mean, it shows that they can compete with the best.
Right. But it's a long season, and there are still some areas, I think, that they need to work on if they really want to be serious title contenders.
Well, you're thinking about that vulnerability to the counterattack.
Yeah.
They saw it, right? With that early goal from Colomwani.
Exactly. I mean, while their attacking play was impressive, especially that second half, that susceptibility to those quick transitions, I think it could be a problem against other teams, especially teams with those really pacey forwards.
Right.
It's something Conte will definitely need to work on if they want to maintain that top spot.
So finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between the attacking flair and that defensive solidity.
Yeah, I mean, it's that classic dilemma for any team that wants to play that really attacking style of football. How do you maintain that threat going forward without leaving yourself exposed at the back?
Right.
It's something that Conte, I mean, with all his experience, would be very aware of.
All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Juventus. This loss, I mean, it must have been a tough one to swallow. First defeat of the season, and to lose it to a rival like Napoli.
I mean, it definitely would have stung. And the question is, how do they respond? I mean, do they crumble under the pressure, or do they use it as motivation to come back stronger?
I mean, some might say that this loss exposed some cracks, particularly defensively. They looked a little shaky at times, especially when Napoli started to press higher in that second half.
I think that's fair. I mean, Mata will need to address those defensive vulnerabilities for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was just individual errors, right? I think their midfield also struggled to control the game, and that just put even more pressure on the defense.
Right.
They just seemed to lack that creativity, that spark that we're used to seeing from Juventus.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they relied a bit too much on that counterattack, and when that wasn't working, it's like they didn't have a plan B.
It's a good point. I mean, their counterattacking threat is always dangerous, but they need to be more versatile, more adaptable. Teams are starting to figure out how to nullify that, and Juventus need to have other options if they want to win consistently against the top teams.
So tactically, there are some things for Mata to work on. But what about mentally? I mean, how does a team like Juventus, a team that's so used to winning, how do they bounce back from a defeat like this?
I mean, it's all about mindset. Mata needs to make sure that his players don't dwell on this loss. They need to use it as fuel to improve. It's a real test of their character. And how they respond in these upcoming matches is going to be crucial.
Do you think this loss could have a knock-on effect? Could it impact their performance in those big games coming up, especially against the other title rivals?
It's possible it could, create some doubt, a fear of losing that wasn't there before, but it could also have the opposite effect.
Right.
It could light a fire under them, make them even more determined to prove everyone wrong. It'll be interesting to see how they react.
Speaking of reactions, let's talk about those individual performances that caught our eye. We already mentioned Lukaku and Anguissa
Right.
For Napoli.
Right.
But what about Juventus? Besides that debut goal from Colomwani, anything else that really stood out to you?
Honestly, it was a tough night for most of those Juventus players. They were outplayed, I think, for large parts of that match, and very few of them played up to their usual standards.
Yeah.
But I thought Chiesa, even though he came on as a substitute, showed glimpses of his quality. I mean, his pace, his directness. I think that caused Napoli some problems, and he almost scored that late equalizer.
He's always a threat when he's on the pitch, but it sounds like overall Juventus just weren't at their best.
No, I don't think so. I mean, they lacked that sharpness, that intensity that we associate with them.
Right.
It was almost as if they underestimated Napoli, or maybe they weren't quite prepared for the intensity and the tactical nous that Conte brought to the game.
Which brings us back to Conte, right? I mean, he's really got Napoli playing with confidence, with belief. They look like a completely different team from last season.
Oh, yeah. He's had a huge impact. He's instilled this clear tactical identity. The players have bought into it. They're playing with a hunger and a desire that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
But it's still early.
Right.
It's still early days, and there's going to be plenty of twists and turns.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes it exciting, right? I mean, we've got a real title race on our hands. I mean, several teams capable of winning the Scudetto.
Oh, absolutely. This Napoli-Juventus match, it was just a taste of what's to come. I mean, there are going to be more tactical battles, more drama, more surprises along the way, and we'll be here to break it all down.
I mean, this Napoli-Juventus clash, it wasn't just a match.
It was a statement for sure.
It felt like a real turning point in the season. Napoli proving they're here to stay, and Juventus facing their first real test.
Yeah, what really stood out to me was how Conte's tactics just completely shut down Juventus. You know, they couldn't get that counterattack going, and their midfield, I mean, they were overrun in that second half.
It really does come back to those in-game adjustments, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, pushing those fullbacks up, it was risky, but wow, it really paid off.
Yeah, it totally changed the game.
It did.
It's like he knew exactly how to pick apart Juventus's weaknesses. That narrow formation, it left them so open out wide, and Napoli just kept exploiting that space.
It was like watching a masterclass in tactics.
It really was.
It makes you think, could this be the start of a trend? Is that classic counterattacking style? Is it becoming less effective? Are we going to see teams like Napoli, the ones who can control possession and press high? Are they going to start to dominate?
It's a good question. I mean, the game is always changing, right? What worked before might not work now. And we have seen a real shift towards possession-based football, haven't we? And the teams that can control the tempo, create chances, they seem to be having more success.
But, we can't forget that Juventus have been incredibly successful with their counter-attacking style. They've won a lot of trophies playing that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they have too much quality to just disappear.
Right.
But maybe this loss will force them to adapt a bit. Maybe we'll see them become a bit more flexible, able to switch things up depending on who they're playing.
So maybe this match could be a turning point.
Yeah.
Not just for Juventus, but for the whole league.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a reminder that no team can just sit back and rely on what they've always done.
You got to keep moving forward.
Exactly. You got to adapt. You got to improve if you want to stay at the top.
And we definitely saw that adaptability from Napoli. They weren't afraid to change things up, and it won them the match. So what other surprises do you think they have in store for us this season?
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? You just never know.
You never know.
But I think one thing's for sure, this Napoli team, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. You can just see the confidence, the belief, and they have a manager who knows how to put it all together.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into this incredible match. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think this match really showed us the bigger picture, It highlighted just how important it is to be flexible, to adapt, to embrace change if you want to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think Napoli, they really embodied that. And Juventus, well, maybe they were a bit too stuck in their ways. So it'll be interesting to see how they both move forward from this.
It's going to be a really exciting season. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another tactical breakdown, another chance to explore the beautiful game.
See you then.